The lawyer's pen made this scratching sound against the paper, like fingernails on a coffin lid. 40 years of marriage, reduced to signatures on documents that smelled like fresh ink and regret. I was 72 when I finally did it, when I finally chose myself. People think divorce at my age is some kind of tragedy, a failure. They whisper behind grocery store aisles, "Poor Harold couldn't make it work." They don't understand that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you've been living a lie for decades. The morning I made the decision, I was sitting in our kitchen, the same kitchen where we'd shared thousands of silent breakfasts. The coffee was cold in my cup, had been for 20 minutes, but I couldn't taste it anyway. Haven't been able to taste much of anything for years, if I'm being honest. Margaret was reading the newspaper, making those little disapproving sounds she'd perfected over 4 decades. Little clicks of her tongue when she disagreed with something. Used to be charming, back in 1972. By 2012, it felt like water torture. Have you ever looked across a table and realized you're staring at a stranger? Someone who shares your last name, your bed, your mortgage, but you have no idea who they actually are anymore? That's what 40 years of slow erosion looks like. Not dramatic fights or affairs or broken dishes, just disappearing, piece by piece, morning by morning, until you wake up one day and you're a ghost in your own house. The house we bought when I was 32, back when everything felt possible. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a little garden out back where Margaret planted roses that first spring. Those roses are still there, wild and overgrown now. Neither of us had touched them in years. We stopped talking sometime in the 90s. Really talking, I mean. We still discussed grocery lists and doctor appointments and whose turn it was to call the plumber. But when was the last time we talked about dreams, about fears, about anything that mattered? I tried to remember sitting there with my cold coffee. Our last real conversation, our last laugh that wasn't forced, our last time we touched each other and meant it. Nothing. Just decades of polite coexistence. The thing about a marriage that dies slowly is that you don't notice it's happening. It's like watching your hair go gray or your back start to ache. One day you're young and in love, making plans and sharing secrets. The next day you're old and you can't remember why you thought this person was your soulmate. Margaret and I met at a church social in 1970. She wore this yellow dress that caught the light when she laughed. God, she had the most beautiful laugh, infectious. Made everyone in the room turn and smile just from hearing it. When did she stop laughing like that? When did I stop making her laugh? We got married 2 years later, small ceremony, just family and close friends. I remember thinking I was the luckiest man alive. This gorgeous, smart, funny woman wanted to spend her life with me. Me, Harold Peterson from nowhere, Ohio, who fixed radiators for a living and had never been further than Indianapolis. The first 10 years were good, really good. We were building something together, a life, a future. We talked about having children, spent hours picking out names and imagining what they'd look like. Would they have her green eyes or my stubborn chin? Turns out they'd have neither. The fertility problems started around year 8, month after month of hope and disappointment. Doctor's appointments that left us both hollow and desperate. Treatments that emptied our savings and filled our marriage with a different kind of silence. Not peaceful silence, careful silence, like we were both walking on glass. We never talked about it directly, never said the words, "We can't have children." We just stopped trying, stopped hoping, started existing in parallel lines that never touched. She threw herself into her teaching, 3rd grade at Maple Elementary, became the mother to other people's children while our own remained ghosts in rooms we never filled. I buried myself in work, longer hours at the shop, weekend projects, anything to avoid the weight of our shared disappointment. By the time we hit 20 years, we'd perfected the art of living separate lives under the same roof. She had her book club and her garden society. I had my fishing trips and my workshop in the basement. We were roommates with matching wedding rings. But we stayed. Oh, we stayed. Because that's what you did in our generation. Marriage was supposed to be forever, no matter what forever felt like. No matter if forever felt like slow suffocation. The worst part wasn't the silence or the distance or even the loneliness. The worst part was how normal it all felt. how easy it became to live without connection, without joy, without hope that things could ever be different. I started having this recurring dream around my 60th birthday. I was in a gray room with no doors or windows, just gray walls and gray light and the sound of a clock ticking somewhere I couldn't see. In the dream, I knew I could leave if I wanted to, but I never tried. I just sat there, listening to the clock, waiting for something to change. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, lying next to Margaret, who slept turned away from me, always turned away, had been for years. That's when I started thinking about it seriously. Divorce. The word felt foreign in my mouth, like trying to speak a language I'd never learned. But once the thought took root, I couldn't shake it. What if I didn't have to live like this? What if these weren't supposed to be the best years of my life? What if there was still time for something else? The morning I finally said it out loud, the words came out cracked and dry, like they'd been stuck in my throat for decades. Margaret, I think we should talk about getting divorced. She didn't even look up from her newspaper, just made another one of those little disapproving sounds. Don't be ridiculous, Harold. People our age don't get divorced. But I'd already made up my mind. Had been making it up for months, maybe years. The decision felt like taking off shoes that had been too tight for so long I'd forgotten what comfortable felt like. The process was surprisingly simple. Irreconcilable differences. No fighting over assets or custody or who got the good china. We split everything down the middle like we'd been splitting everything else for decades. She kept the house. I got the workshop equipment and my grandfather's tools. Fair enough. She'd always loved that house more than she'd loved me anyway. The day I moved out, she was at her sister's. Didn't want to watch me pack 40 years of shared life into cardboard boxes. I don't blame her. Watching a marriage die is harder than watching it decay. I loaded my truck with clothes and books and the few things that felt like mine. Left my key on the kitchen counter next to a note that just said thank you for trying, because we had tried in our own quiet way. We'd tried to be happy, tried to make it work, tried to become the couple we'd imagined on our wedding day. We just couldn't. And maybe that's okay. Maybe admitting failure isn't always failing. Maybe sometimes it's finally telling the truth. I moved into a small apartment across town. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a little balcony that faced east so I could watch the sunrise. First morning I woke up there, I made coffee and sat on that balcony and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace, not happiness, not yet, but peace. The kind that comes from finally stopping pretending. That was 6 years ago. 6 years of learning how to be Harold Peterson again, not just Margaret's husband. 6 years of rediscovering what I actually liked and wanted and needed. Turns out, I like jazz music. Never knew that, because Margaret always said it gave her headaches. I like cooking breakfast for one. I like reading until 3 in the morning without worrying about keeping someone awake. I like the sound of my own thoughts without having to measure them against someone else's judgment. I'm not saying divorce is always the answer. I'm not saying people should give up at the first sign of trouble. But I am saying that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes compatibility matters more than history. Sometimes choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Margaret remarried last year. A widower from her church named Frank who laughs at her jokes and holds her hand during service. I'm happy for her, really. We both deserve to be chosen by someone who actually wanted to choose us. As for me, I'm still figuring it out. Still learning how to live for Harold instead of living around the absence of happiness. Some days are harder than others. Some days I miss having someone to share the weather with, even if that someone had stopped really listening years ago. But most days I wake up and make my coffee and sit on my balcony and think about all the mornings I have left, all the choices I get to make, all the possibilities that still exist when you finally stop pretending impossible things are possible. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in my story, if you're sitting across from someone who used to be everything and is now just familiar, if you're counting years instead of cherishing moments, maybe it's not too late. Maybe 72 isn't too old to start over. Maybe admitting the truth is the first step toward finding it. Maybe the bravest thing you can do is choose yourself while there's still a self left to choose. The coffee's never cold anymore. That's something, isn't it?